The turkey was perfectly golden, the cranberry sauce gleamed in crystal bowls, and my family was about to discover that their biggest disappointment had just become the most powerful woman in the room. They just didn't know it yet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I sat at the far end of our family's mahogany dining table in our sprawling estate in Willowbrook Heights, picking at my mashed potatoes while my cousin Derek regaled everyone with stories of his latest real estate conquests. The autumn light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the table where 3 generations of the Hartwell family had gathered for what they assumed would be another typical Thanksgiving filled with judgment, comparison, and thinly veiled disappointment in me. "And that's how I closed the Riverside development deal," Derek announced, his chest puffed with pride as he straightened his expensive Armani tie. $15 million in profit, just like that. He snapped his manicured fingers for effect, the sound echoing through our formal dining room, with its hand-painted wallpaper and ancestral portraits staring down at us with stern disapproval. My Aunt Patricia, Derek's mother, beamed from across the table. "Isn't that wonderful? Derek's always been such a go-getter. Some people in this family could learn from his example." Her eyes found mine with laser precision, the same look she'd been giving me for the past 5 years since I'd made what everyone considered the worst decision of my life. My grandmother, Eleanor Hartwell, the family matriarch who still controlled most of our textile fortune from her perch at the head of the table, nodded approvingly. "Success runs in our blood," she declared, her diamond necklace catching the light as she gestured toward Derek. "Those who embrace it thrive. Those who chase foolish dreams." She let the sentence hang in the air like a sword over my head. My younger sister Victoria, the golden child with her MBA from Wharton and her corner office at Goldman Sachs, couldn't resist joining the assault. "Speaking of foolish dreams, how's your little venture going, Natalie?" The way she said little venture made it sound like I was selling friendship bracelets at a craft fair instead of running what I'd built over the past 3 years. I took a sip of wine, feeling the familiar knot in my stomach that always appeared at these family gatherings. "It's going well, actually." Derek laughed, nearly choking on his wine. "Come on, Nat, we all know what going well means in startup language. How much money have you lost this quarter?" The conversation I'd been dreading was starting right on schedule. Every family holiday for the past 3 years had followed the same script: successful family members sharing their achievements, followed by a systematic dismantling of my choices, my business, and my life decisions. My father, Robert Hartwell III, cleared his throat from his position of authority at the head of the table opposite my grandmother. As the CEO of Hartwell Industries, our family's textile manufacturing empire that had been built over 4 generations, he commanded respect and attention whenever he spoke. "Natalie, your mother and I have been discussing your situation." Here it comes, I thought, bracing myself for another intervention. "We think it's time for you to come back to reality," he continued, his voice carrying that familiar tone of paternal disappointment that had followed me since college. "This technology venture of yours has been educational, I'm sure. But you're 32 years old. It's time to take your place in the family business where you belong." My mother, Caroline, nodded vigorously, her pearls bobbing with each movement. "Darling, we've kept the position of Director of Corporate Communications open for you. It's a wonderful opportunity to use your creative talents in a stable, respectable environment. With a guaranteed salary," Victoria added smugly, "instead of whatever it is you're doing now. What do you call yourself again? A tech entrepreneur?" She said the words like they tasted bitter. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. 3 years ago, I'd walked away from a comfortable position at our family company to start Phoenix Digital Solutions, an artificial intelligence and data analytics firm. While my family saw it as a rebellion against tradition, I saw it as the future. Unfortunately, explaining machine learning algorithms and predictive analytics to a family rooted in textile manufacturing was like speaking a foreign language. "I call myself the founder and CEO of a technology company," I said quietly, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. Derek snorted. Technology company? Natalie, you work out of a shared office space in downtown Millfield. I've seen the building. It's hardly what I'd call impressive. At least it's honest work, my Uncle Thomas chimed in from across the table. Not like these cryptocurrency people or those influencer types, though I still don't understand what exactly you do all day. What they didn't understand was that my little venture had just revolutionized supply chain management for Fortune 500 companies. What they couldn't see from their traditional business perspective was that artificial intelligence wasn't just the future. It was the present, and I was already living in it. The irony wasn't lost on me that while they criticized my technology focus, Hartwell Industries was struggling to compete with modernized competitors. Their fourth quarter profits had dropped 18%, though nobody at this table wanted to acknowledge that their precious family empire was slowly becoming obsolete. The offer stands, my father said firmly, department head, full benefits, profit sharing. All you have to do is give up this tech fantasy and rejoin the real world. I looked around the table at their expectant faces. My grandmother's stern expression of disapproval, my parents' mixture of disappointment and hope, Victoria's smug superiority, Derek's barely concealed amusement, my aunt and uncle's polite but obvious agreement that I was the family failure. They had no idea that in about 30 minutes, their entire perception of success, failure, and who held the real power in this room was about to be completely shattered. They didn't know about the private meetings, the late-night negotiations, or the partnerships I'd been building while they assumed I was struggling to pay rent. Most importantly, they had no idea that the most powerful woman in American technology was about to walk through our front door, and she wasn't coming to save me from my failures. She was coming to celebrate our success. Well, my father pressed, clearly expecting me to cave under the family pressure just like I had so many times before. I smiled, checking my phone discreetly. Any minute now, everything would change. Actually, Dad, I said, my voice steadier than it had been all evening. I think I'll stick with my current career path. The table erupted in the familiar symphony of sighs, eye rolls, and disappointed murmurs that had become the soundtrack to my family dinners. They had no idea their world was about to turn upside down. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The disappointed murmurs around the table grew louder as my family processed my refusal to abandon what they saw as my foolish tech venture. My grandmother Eleanor set down her wineglass with the kind of deliberate precision that demanded attention from everyone in the room. Natalie, she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had built and maintained family wealth for over 4 decades. Perhaps you don't fully understand what you're refusing. She gestured toward the oil paintings lining our dining room walls. 4 generations of Hartwell patriarchs who had built our textile empire from a single cotton mill in 1892 to the multi-million-dollar operation it was today. This family has created something lasting, something real. Hartwell Industries employs over 3,000 people across 7 states. We own manufacturing facilities, distribution networks, retail partnerships with every major department store chain in America. My father nodded, clearly pleased to have his mother's support in what had become an annual intervention. Your grandmother is right. We're offering you a legacy, Natalie. A chance to be part of something bigger than yourself. Derek leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who had never faced a moment of doubt about his place in the family hierarchy. Nat, last month alone, my real estate division generated more revenue than most companies see in a year. We're talking about 8-figure deals, properties that will appreciate for decades. That's real wealth creation. He pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what I assumed were property photos. This penthouse in downtown Riverside sold for $12 million. The commercial complex on Harbor Street? $15 million profit after development costs. These aren't just numbers, they're generational wealth. Victoria, never one to be outdone by our cousin, straightened in her chair. And the Goldman Sachs promotion I mentioned? I'm now the youngest woman ever to make senior vice president in the investment banking division. My bonus alone this year was more than most people's annual salary." She paused for effect, letting the weight of her achievement settle over the table. "I'm managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. My clients trust me with their retirement funds, their children's college savings, their family legacies. That's the kind of responsibility that comes with real success." My Aunt Patricia beamed with maternal pride. "Victoria's always been exceptional, just like her cousin Derek. It's wonderful to see the next generation of Hartwells making their mark in traditional, respected industries." "Exactly," my Uncle Thomas agreed, raising his glass. "Banking, real estate, manufacturing. These are the foundations of American prosperity. Solid, proven business models that have created wealth for centuries." My mother reached across the table and patted my hand with the kind of gentle condescension reserved for wayward children. "Darling, we're not trying to diminish what you've attempted with your little computer business. I'm sure you've learned valuable lessons about entrepreneurship and independence. But let's be realistic," my father continued, his tone growing more serious. "You've been at this for 3 years. If it was going to work, wouldn't we have seen significant results by now? Wouldn't you be able to afford something better than that tiny apartment in Millfield?" The criticism stung because it contained just enough truth to be effective. My apartment was small, my car was 8 years old, and I hadn't taken a real vacation since starting Phoenix Digital Solutions. From the outside, my life looked like a study in financial struggle compared to my family's obvious prosperity. My grandmother leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the candlelight. "At your age, I had already married your grandfather and was helping him expand the first textile mill. Your grandfather, Robert, built 3 additional facilities before he was 35. That's what ambition looks like, Natalie. That's what leaving a mark on the world means." She gestured around the dining room, taking in the crystal chandelier, the hand-carved mahogany furniture, the Persian rugs that had been in our family for generations. This house, this lifestyle, this security, it all came from understanding that success requires working within proven systems, not chasing after every new trend that comes along. Derek nodded enthusiastically. "Grandmother's absolutely right. Technology comes and goes, but people will always need places to live and work. Real estate is forever. Manufacturing is forever. These tech startups, they're here today and gone tomorrow. Remember the dot-com crash?" Victoria added. "All those internet companies that were supposed to revolutionize everything? Most of them don't even exist anymore. The companies that survived were the ones with real business models, real revenue streams, real assets." My father stood up, moving to the sideboard where he kept his collection of business awards and photographs with various industry leaders and politicians. "Natalie, I've been in business for over 30 years. I've seen trends come and go. What remains constant is the value of hard work, proven methods, and family unity." He picked up a framed photograph of himself shaking hands with the governor at some industry event. This picture was taken when Hartwell Industries was named Manufacturer of the Year for the 3rd consecutive time. That's the kind of recognition that comes from excellence, from understanding that business success is built on relationships, reputation, and results that you can measure in concrete terms. Not in abstract concepts like artificial intelligence or whatever it is you're trying to sell, my Uncle Thomas added, with a dismissive wave of his hand. The weight of their collective success pressed down on me like a physical force. Every achievement they'd mentioned was real, measurable, and impressive by any objective standard. Their bank accounts, their properties, their positions of authority in their respective industries, it all represented the kind of traditional success that American families had aspired to for generations. And then there was me, sitting at the far end of the table in my simple black dress that I'd bought on sale, defending a business that none of them understood and that, from their perspective, had produced no visible results worth celebrating. "The position at Hartwell Industries is still available," my mother said softly. Department head salary starts at $180,000, plus benefits, plus profit sharing. You could move back home while you save for a proper house. You could start building real wealth instead of... She gestured vaguely in my direction, unable to find words for what she saw as my current state of professional limbo. My grandmother picked up her wine glass again, signaling that the conversation was reaching its conclusion. Family loyalty isn't just about blood, Natalie. It's about recognizing that together, we're stronger than we could ever be apart. Your place is here, with us, building on what previous generations have created. The silence that followed felt heavy with expectation. 8 pairs of eyes focused on me, waiting for me to finally see reason, to acknowledge that they were right and I was wrong, to accept that my experiment in independence had run its course. I looked around the table at their confident faces, their expensive clothes, their visible symbols of wealth and status. They had every reason to believe they were right. From their perspective, they were offering me salvation from a path that led nowhere. If only they knew what was about to walk through our front door. I checked my phone one more time. She would be here any minute now. I appreciate the offer, I said quietly, but I think I'll see how things play out. The collective sigh that went around the table sounded like air being let out of a balloon. Their last attempt at saving me from myself had failed, and now they would have to watch me continue down what they saw as a path to inevitable failure. They had no idea that failure was the last thing on my mind. The disappointment in my family's collective sigh was almost palpable, but they weren't finished with me yet. My grandmother Eleanor set down her fork with deliberate precision, the small clink against her china plate somehow managing to sound like a gavel calling court to order. "Natalie," she began, her voice taking on the tone she usually reserved for discussing particularly disappointing quarterly reports, "I think it's time we address the elephant in the room." My stomach dropped. I knew that tone. It was the same one she'd used when she'd discovered my cousin Timothy had been embezzling from the company pension fund 5 years ago, right before she'd had him quietly removed from the family business and effectively exiled from family gatherings. "We've all been very patient with this phase of yours," she continued, gesturing dismissively toward me. "But patience has its limits, especially when it comes to family reputation." My father cleared his throat, clearly taking his cue from his mother. "Your grandmother is right. This isn't just about you anymore, Natalie. The Hartwell name means something in this community, in this industry. When people see a Hartwell failing at some fly-by-night technology venture, it reflects on all of us." Derek laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Last week at the country club, 3 different people asked me about my cousin who's, quote, playing with computers. That's what they called it. Playing with computers. Like you're some kind of hobbyist tinkering in your garage." "It's embarrassing," Victoria added bluntly, her MBA-trained directness cutting through any pretense of family diplomacy. "I was in a client meeting last month, and when they heard my last name, they immediately brought up, 'That Hartwell girl who thinks she's going to revolutionize technology.' They were laughing, Natalie, laughing at our family name." My mother reached for her wine glass, her hand trembling slightly. "Darling, you have to understand how this affects all of us. When the Riverside Ladies Auxiliary asks about my daughter's career, what am I supposed to tell them? That you're living in a studio apartment, working 18-hour days for a company that has no revenue?" "No measurable revenue," my Uncle Thomas corrected. "There's a difference. Even if this artificial intelligence thing was legitimate, which I doubt, there would be some kind of financial indicators by now. Profit margins, growth projections, investor interest. Something tangible." My Aunt Patricia nodded vigorously. "Exactly. When Derek started in real estate, within 6 months we could see the trajectory. Actual sales, actual commissions, actual properties under development. Success leaves a trail, Natalie. Where's your trail?" The attack was systematic and coordinated, like they'd planned this intervention down to the last detail. Each family member contributed their piece to the dismantling of my credibility, my choices, and ultimately my worth as a member of the Hartwell dynasty. You want to know what I think? Derek leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying his role as the successful cousin delivering hard truths. I think you're scared. Scared of real responsibility. Scared of real expectations. Scared of competing in a legitimate business environment where results actually matter. He gestured around the table. Look at us, Nat. Victoria manages hundreds of millions in assets, and she's accountable for every penny. I handle real estate deals worth more than most people see in a lifetime, and if I screw up, I lose everything. Dad runs a company with 3,000 employees depending on him for their livelihoods. That's real pressure, Victoria agreed. Real stakes. Not this fantasy world where you can spend 3 years building something with no accountability, no measurable outcomes, no actual responsibilities to anyone but yourself. My grandmother leaned forward, her steel-gray eyes boring into mine. The truth is, Natalie, you've chosen the path of least resistance. This technology venture allows you to avoid the real world of business, where success and failure are measured in concrete terms, where you're accountable to boards of directors, shareholders, employees, and customers. Instead, my father continued, picking up the thread, you've created this elaborate fantasy where you can pretend to be an entrepreneur without any of the real risks or responsibilities that come with actual business ownership. My mother's voice grew softer but somehow more cutting. Sweetheart, we're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to save you from wasting the best years of your life on something that simply isn't real. You're 32 years old. These are the years when you should be building a foundation for your future, not indulging in expensive hobbies. Expensive is right, my Uncle Thomas added. Do you have any idea how much money you've lost on this venture? Equipment, office space, travel, conferences? What's the total damage so far? I felt my cheeks burning. The truth was, I'd invested everything I had. My savings, money borrowed against my trust fund, even funds from selling my grandmother's jewelry that she'd given me for my college graduation. From their perspective, I'd taken a small fortune and lit it on fire, pursuing an impossible dream. The opportunity cost alone is staggering, Victoria said, her banker's mind clearly calculating the numbers. 3 years at even a modest corporate salary would have given you a foundation to build on. Instead, you've got what? A laptop and a lease on shared office space? Derek pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be real estate listings. For what you've probably spent on this tech fantasy, you could have bought a solid investment property. Something that would have been generating actual rental income while appreciating in value. That's what real entrepreneurs do, my grandmother said definitively. They invest in tangible assets. Property, equipment, inventory, things you can see, touch, measure, and sell if necessary, not abstract concepts that exist only in computers. My father stood up and walked to the window, looking out over our family's estate, 30 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, stables, tennis court, and the swimming pool where I'd learned to swim as a child. This property, this house, this lifestyle, it was all built on real business principles. Supply and demand, profit margins, market expansion, customer relationships. He turned back to face me. Your great-great-grandfather started with a single textile loom and a work ethic that wouldn't quit. He understood that business success comes from providing something people actually need and are willing to pay for, not from chasing after technological fairy tales. The problem with your generation, my Aunt Patricia said, shaking her head sadly, is that you think business should be fun, exciting, revolutionary. Real business is often boring, repetitive, and challenging. It requires discipline, patience, and the ability to do things you don't want to do because they need to be done. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. Darling, we love you. That's why we're having this conversation. We can't stand by and watch you throw your life away on something that has no foundation in reality. The artificial intelligence market is completely oversaturated, Victoria added, clearly having done her research. Every major corporation already has AI departments staffed with people who have advanced degrees from MIT and Stanford. What could you possibly offer that Google, Microsoft, or IBM doesn't already have? Derek nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. You're competing against companies with unlimited resources, established customer bases, and decades of experience. It's like trying to compete with McDonald's by opening a hamburger stand in your driveway. My Uncle Thomas leaned forward, his expression genuinely concerned. Natalie, I've been in business for 25 years. I've seen hundreds of people chase after the next big thing, the revolutionary idea that's going to change everything. You know what happens to 99% of them? They end up broke, bitter, and starting over in their 40s. The 1% that succeed, my grandmother added, usually have massive funding, experienced teams, and connections in the industry that take decades to develop. They don't work out of shared office spaces in Millfield. The silence that followed felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. 8 pairs of eyes stared at me with a mixture of frustration, disappointment, and what they probably thought was loving concern. In their minds, they'd just delivered an intervention that should have opened my eyes to the reality of my situation. They'd systematically dismantled every aspect of my business, my choices, and my future prospects. They'd shown me exactly how my failure was affecting the family reputation. They'd offered me concrete alternatives backed by their own obvious success. From their perspective, any rational person would accept defeat and embrace the safety net they were offering. I checked my phone again. 7 minutes. I understand your concerns, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. But I think there might be some things about my business that you don't fully understand. The looks that passed around the table could have frozen water. My grandmother's expression alone suggested that the very idea of them not understanding something about business was borderline insulting. What we understand, my father said slowly, is that 3 years of your life and a substantial amount of money have produced nothing that any of us can see, touch, or measure. What we understand, Derek added, is that you're living like a college student while the rest of us have built actual wealth and security. What we understand, Victoria concluded, is that you're running out of time to make a rational decision about your future. I looked around the table at their confident, concerned, disappointed faces. They had no idea that in 6 minutes, their understanding of success, business, and who held the real power in this room was about to be completely redefined. Maybe you're right, I said, reaching for my water glass. Maybe I should reconsider my priorities. For the first time all evening, I saw relief flash across my parents' faces. Finally, their stubborn daughter was showing signs of seeing reason. If only they knew what was about to walk through our front door. The moment of apparent surrender that had flashed across my parents' faces didn't last long. My grandmother Eleanor, ever the shrewd businesswoman, leaned back in her chair and studied me with the kind of calculating gaze that had made her legendary in textile industry negotiations. I'm glad you're finally showing some sense, Natalie, she said slowly, but there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by my sudden reasonableness. However, I've been in business long enough to know the difference between genuine recognition and tactical retreat. My father raised an eyebrow. What do you mean, Mother? I mean, Eleanor continued, never taking her eyes off me, that your daughter has been sitting through this entire conversation with the composure of someone who knows something we don't. Most people, when confronted with the kind of comprehensive reality check we've just delivered, show more emotional response. She was right, and I realized my poker face might have been too good. A truly devastated entrepreneur facing family intervention would be crying, arguing, or pleading. Instead, I'd remained calm, almost serene, throughout their systematic demolition of my life choices. Derek noticed it too. You know what? Grandmother's right. Nat, you've been weirdly chill this whole time. Usually, when we have these conversations, you get defensive, start rattling off statistics about the tech industry, pull out your laptop to show us charts and graphs we don't understand. But tonight, Victoria observed, her banker's instincts clearly activated, you've been almost patient, like you're waiting for something. My mother frowned, studying my face with the kind of maternal intuition that had caught me in countless childhood lies. Natalie, is there something you're not telling us? You keep checking your phone, and you have that look you used to get when you were 10 and hiding something. I felt a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth before I could stop it. 22 years later, and my mother could still read me like a book. The irony was that this time, instead of hiding something embarrassing or troublesome, I was hiding the biggest professional triumph of my life. What look? I asked, trying to maintain my composed facade. That look, my father said, pointing at my face. The same expression you had when you told us you were just going to study. The weekend you actually drove to Boston with your college roommate to see that concert we'd forbidden you to attend. Derek laughed. Oh man, I remember that. You came back on Sunday acting all innocent, but you had this tiny, satisfied smile that gave you away completely. You're doing it again, my Aunt Patricia observed. That little smile, like you know something amusing that the rest of us haven't figured out yet. My Uncle Thomas leaned forward, his business instincts clearly pinging with suspicion. Natalie, in my experience, when someone remains calm during a difficult conversation, it usually means they have an ace up their sleeve. What aren't you telling us? The questions were getting uncomfortably close to the truth, but I couldn't help feeling a surge of satisfaction that after 3 years of being dismissed as naive and unrealistic, my family was finally recognizing that I might possess some strategic thinking abilities. Maybe I've just matured enough to listen to criticism without getting defensive, I suggested, though even as I said it, I knew they wouldn't buy it. Victoria snorted. Right, because you've been the picture of mature acceptance every other time we've had this conversation. Remember last Christmas when you stormed out after Dad suggested you consider law school? Or 2 Christmases ago when you gave us that 40-minute presentation about machine learning algorithms, Derek added. You practically turned our dining room into a conference room, complete with pie charts and market projections. My grandmother's eyes narrowed. Those presentations were actually quite impressive, technically speaking. Overly optimistic and commercially unrealistic, but technically sound. Which raises an interesting question. She paused, clearly formulating her thoughts with the precision of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. If your venture is truly the failure we've been describing, why aren't you fighting back? Where are this year's charts and graphs? Where's your passionate defense of artificial intelligence? Where's the fire we usually see when you talk about your work? The question hung in the air like a challenge. My family was beginning to realize that something about this conversation felt different from their previous interventions. My calm acceptance of their criticism was so out of character that it was raising more questions than it answered. My mother set down her wine glass with a soft clink. Natalie Elizabeth Hartwell, you're hiding something. I can feel it. The use of my full name meant she was shifting into serious maternal investigation mode. I'd heard that tone exactly 3 times in my life. When she'd discovered I'd been sneaking out to meet boys in high school, when she'd found out I'd changed my major from business to computer science without telling them, and when she'd learned I'd withdrawn money from my trust fund to start Phoenix Digital Solutions. What makes you think I'm hiding anything? I asked, genuinely curious about how transparent I'd apparently been. Because, my father said, studying me with the kind of analytical attention he usually reserved for quarterly reports, you've been checking your phone every few minutes since dinner started. Not casually, not the way people normally check their phones, but deliberately, like you're expecting something specific. Derek pulled out his own phone and glanced at the time. Actually, yeah, you've been doing it like clockwork. Every 3 or 4 minutes. You check your phone, look at the time, and then get this tiny smile. It's 7:47 now, Victoria observed, also checking her phone. You just looked at yours about 2 minutes ago. If I had to guess, I'd say you're waiting for something to happen at a specific time. My grandmother leaned forward, her business instincts fully engaged. In my experience, when someone maintains unusual composure during a confrontation while repeatedly checking the time, they're expecting reinforcements. The accuracy of her assessment was startling. After 4 decades of high-level business negotiations, she'd developed an almost supernatural ability to read people's motivations and strategies. Reinforcements? My Uncle Thomas asked. What kind of reinforcements could Natalie possibly have? Her business partner is probably some 25-year-old programmer who's just as broke as she is. That's assuming she has a business partner at all, Derek added skeptically. For all we know, Phoenix Digital Solutions is just Natalie working alone in a shared office space, calling herself CEO of a one-person company. But my grandmother wasn't buying the dismissive explanations. No, she said slowly, her voice taking on the tone she used when she was working through a complex business problem. There's something we're missing here. Something important. She looked directly at me, and I felt like she was seeing straight through to my thoughts. Natalie, you've been remarkably composed for someone whose family just spent an hour systematically dismantling 3 years of work. That level of calm suggests either complete emotional detachment or complete confidence. And you're not emotionally detached, my mother added. I can see in your eyes that you care about what we think, that our criticism affects you. But you're not devastated. You're not angry, you're not defensive. You're waiting, my father concluded. The question is, what are you waiting for? I glanced at my phone again, unable to help myself. 3 minutes. There, Victoria said, pointing at me triumphantly. You did it again! You checked your phone, looked at the time, and got that satisfied expression. Something's definitely happening, and it's happening soon. My Aunt Patricia gasped softly. Oh my goodness! Natalie, do you have some kind of backup plan? Some kind of surprise you're planning to spring on us? The excitement in her voice was almost comical. After spending the entire evening treating me like a disappointing child who needed to be saved from her own poor judgment, my family was suddenly faced with the possibility that I might actually know what I was doing. A surprise, my grandmother repeated thoughtfully. That would certainly explain the confidence. But what kind of surprise could possibly change the fundamental facts of your situation? Derek leaned back in his chair, clearly skeptical but intrigued. Okay, I'll bite. Nat, if you've got some kind of big reveal planned, now would be the time. We've laid out our case, shown you the reality of your situation. If there's something we don't know, something that changes the equation, let's hear it. Unless, Victoria added with a slightly mocking tone, this is just wishful thinking. Maybe you're waiting for some imaginary investor to call and validate all your unrealistic expectations. But even as she said it, I could see doubt creeping into her expression. My continued calm in the face of their comprehensive criticism was so unusual that it was forcing them to reconsider their assumptions about my situation. My Uncle Thomas looked around the table at the other faces, all focused on me with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and anticipation. Well, Natalie, your family has been remarkably patient with what we see as 3 years of poor decision-making. If there's something that changes the picture, we'd like to know what it is. I checked my phone one more time. 2 minutes. Actually, I said, my voice carrying a confidence that I'd been carefully controlling all evening, there might be 1 or 2 things about Phoenix Digital Solutions that I haven't mentioned. The collective intake of breath around the table was audible. After an hour of treating me like a delusional child, my family was suddenly confronted with the possibility that their comprehensive understanding of my failure might be incomplete. What things? My grandmother asked sharply, her business instincts now fully alert. I looked around the table at their expectant faces, savoring this moment of transition from dismissal to curiosity. In less than 2 minutes, curiosity would transform into something much more dramatic. Well, I said, allowing myself the smallest hint of a smile, I suppose it depends on how you define success. The curiosity that had been building around the table suddenly crystallized into something much more intense. My grandmother Eleanor's business instincts were now in full predator mode, and she leaned forward with the kind of focused attention that had made her legendary in boardroom negotiations. "How we define success," she repeated, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Natalie, there are only a few ways to define business success, and they all involve measurable results. Revenue, profit margins, market share, asset valuation, concrete numbers that can be audited and verified." My father's expression had shifted from disappointed concern to something approaching alarm. "Natalie, are you telling us that there are financial aspects of your business that you haven't disclosed? Because if you've been hiding income or assets, that raises serious questions about trust and family transparency." Derek laughed, but it was a nervous sound now rather than his earlier condescending amusement. "Come on, Dad. What could she possibly be hiding? We've all seen her apartment, her car, her lifestyle. If Phoenix Digital Solutions was generating serious money, wouldn't there be some visible evidence?" "Not necessarily," Victoria said slowly, her banker's mind clearly working through possibilities. "There are plenty of ways to structure business finances that wouldn't show up in personal spending. Retained earnings, reinvestment strategies, deferred compensation packages." She trailed off, studying my face with the kind of analytical intensity she usually reserved for high-stakes client evaluations. "Natalie, when you say how we define success, are you implying that your business is successful by metrics we haven't considered?" My Uncle Thomas set down his wineglass with more force than necessary. "This is ridiculous. We're talking about a 3-year-old technology startup operating out of shared office space. Even if there were hidden revenues, we're not talking about anything that would fundamentally change the situation. Are we sure about that?" my Aunt Patricia asked, her voice rising slightly. "I mean, some of these technology companies do have unusual business models. Didn't Facebook operate at a loss for years before suddenly becoming worth billions?" My mother reached across the table and gripped my wrist with surprising intensity. "Natalie Elizabeth, I want a straight answer right now. Is your business making money? Real money? Because if you've been lying to us about your financial situation while we've been worried sick about your future..." The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. The family dynamic was shifting rapidly from protective concern to something approaching betrayal and anger. The possibility that I might have been deliberately misleading them about my circumstances was clearly more disturbing than my apparent failure had been. "Lying is a strong word, Mom," I said carefully, checking my phone again. "1 minute." "Don't you dare check that phone again!" Derek exploded, his real estate mogul composure finally cracking. "We're having a family crisis here, and you're acting like you're waiting for a pizza delivery." My grandmother slammed her hand on the table with enough force to make the crystal glasses ring. "Enough! Natalie, I have been patient with your evasive answers and mysterious behavior, but my patience has reached its limit. I want to know, right now, exactly what the financial status of Phoenix Digital Solutions is. And I want to know," my father added, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in board meetings, "why you've allowed this family to worry about your financial security if your business is actually generating income." Victoria pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. "You know what? I'm going to look up Phoenix Digital Solutions right now. If there's public financial information available, I can access it through my Goldman Sachs databases." "Good idea," Derek agreed, also reaching for his phone. "Business registrations, revenue reports, client lists. If this company is legitimate, there should be a digital footprint." My Uncle Thomas was shaking his head in disbelief. "I can't believe we're even entertaining this possibility. Look at her, look at how she lives." If Phoenix Digital Solutions was generating serious revenue, would she be driving an 8-year-old Honda and living in a studio apartment? "Unless," my grandmother said slowly, her steel gray eyes boring into mine. She's been deliberately maintaining the appearance of struggle while building something much larger behind the scenes. The accusation was delivered with the kind of cold precision that had made Eleanor Hartwell famous for dismantling dishonest business partners during contract negotiations. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "That would be," my mother said, her voice trembling slightly, "the most manipulative thing I could possibly imagine. Allowing your family to suffer, to worry about your future, to offer you financial assistance, while secretly building wealth." "It would be unconscionable," my father agreed, his face flushing with mounting anger. "To sit through years of family interventions, to accept our concern and advice, to let us believe you were struggling financially while hiding business success?" Derek stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "If that's what's been happening here, Nat, that's not just dishonest, it's cruel. Do you have any idea how many nights Mom and Dad have stayed up worrying about your future? How many family conversations have centered around trying to figure out how to help you without damaging your pride?" Victoria added, her banker's analytical nature now focused on calculating emotional rather than financial damages. My Aunt Patricia looked genuinely hurt. "Natalie, if you've been successful this whole time, why didn't you share that with us? We're your family. We celebrate each other's achievements. Why would you hide yours?" The pain in her voice was real, and I felt a stab of guilt. The truth was, there were legitimate reasons for my secrecy that had nothing to do with manipulation or cruelty. But sitting here now, facing their mounting anger and hurt, those reasons felt increasingly difficult to defend. "Maybe," my Uncle Thomas suggested, his tone growing darker, "she's been enjoying the attention, playing the struggling entrepreneur, accepting our sympathy and concern, while secretly laughing at our naive worry." "That's enough," my grandmother said sharply, but her rebuke was directed at Thomas, not at me. Despite her anger, she retained enough business sense to recognize that wild accusations wouldn't lead to useful information. She turned back to me, her expression a mixture of fury and calculation. "Natalie, I'm going to ask you one direct question, and I expect one direct answer. Is Phoenix Digital Solutions currently generating revenue in excess of $100,000 annually?" The specificity of the question revealed just how seriously she was taking this possibility. $100,000 was her threshold for considering a business legitimate. Enough to live on, enough to build from, enough to justify the investment of time and energy. "And if the answer is yes," my father added ominously, "I want to know why you've been deceiving this family for 3 years." "Because deception is exactly what this would be," my mother said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Not privacy, not independence, deception. Allowing people who love you to suffer unnecessary worry while you secretly build success." Victoria looked up from her phone, her expression unreadable. "I'm not finding much public financial information, but that could mean anything. Private companies aren't required to disclose revenue figures." "But Natalie, if you've been taking investor meetings, filing patents, or securing major contracts, there would be some kind of paper trail." Derek was pacing now, his real estate businessman energy needing a physical outlet. "You know what really gets me? If she has been successful, think about all the opportunities we could have created together. Family investment, business partnerships, shared resources, instead of hiding from us like we're the enemy." "Which raises another question," my grandmother said coldly. "If Phoenix Digital Solutions is successful, who are your business partners? Who are your investors? Who are your clients? Because if you've been building something significant, you haven't been doing it alone." The questions were coming faster now, building on each other like an avalanche. 3 years of assumed failure were being rapidly re-examined through the lens of possible deception, and my family's protective concern was transforming into something much more volatile. 30 seconds, Natalie, my father said, looking at his watch. 30 seconds to explain why we shouldn't feel completely betrayed by whatever it is you're about to reveal. My Uncle Thomas shook his head in disgust. Honestly, I don't know which would be worse. Learning that she's actually been struggling this whole time, or learning that she's been lying to us about struggling. I checked my phone one final time. The number I'd been waiting for appeared on my screen. Actually, I said, standing up slowly as my phone began to ring, I think you're about to get your answer. The dining room fell completely silent, except for the insistent buzzing of my phone. 8 pairs of eyes stared at me with a mixture of anticipation, anger, hurt, and confusion. Who, my grandmother asked in a voice that could have cut glass, is calling you at 8 o'clock on Thanksgiving evening? I looked around the table at my family's expectant faces, knowing that the next 60 seconds would change everything between us forever. Someone, I said, reaching for my phone, who's going to explain a few things about Phoenix Digital Solutions that might surprise you. The phone buzzed again in my hand, and I could feel the tension in the room ratchet up another impossible notch. My family's faces were a study in barely controlled emotion. Anger, hurt, anticipation, and underneath it all, a growing fear that they were about to discover something that would fundamentally alter their understanding of the last 3 years. Answer it, my grandmother commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. If this call is going to explain your mysterious behavior, then we all deserve to hear it. I glanced at the caller ID one more time, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervous energy that I'd been suppressing all evening. The name on the screen read Dr. Alexandra Kovaca Industries, and just seeing it there made my heart race with anticipation for what was about to unfold. Speakerphone, my father added firmly. Whatever this conversation is about, if it concerns your business and our family's understanding of your situation, we have a right to hear it directly. Derek had stopped pacing and was now standing behind his chair, gripping the back of it with white knuckles. Yeah, no more mysterious phone calls and cryptic conversations. We want transparency, Nat. Complete transparency. Victoria had her phone out, clearly ready to take notes or research whatever information emerged from this call. Her banker's instincts were in full documentation mode, prepared to analyze and verify any claims that might be made. I took a deep breath and answered the call, immediately putting it on speaker as requested. Hello, Dr. Kovac, thank you for calling. The voice that filled our dining room was crisp, professional, and carried a slight Eastern European accent that immediately commanded attention. Good evening, Natalie. I apologize for calling during your family holiday, but the timing couldn't be avoided. Are you somewhere private where we can discuss the Istanbul situation? My family exchanged glances across the table. Istanbul? What possible business could I have in Istanbul? Actually, I said, meeting my grandmother's steely gaze, I'm here with my family. We've been having a conversation about Phoenix Digital Solutions, and they've expressed some concerns about my business ventures. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear Dr. Kovac's mind working through the implications of family involvement in what she clearly considered sensitive business matters. I see, she said finally, her tone becoming more formal. Well, perhaps this is actually good timing then. The transition we discussed has been accelerated, and we'll need your final authorization tonight. The logistics team in Turkey is standing by, but they need confirmation from both of us before they can proceed. My Uncle Thomas leaned forward, his confusion evident. Natalie, who exactly are you talking to? And what's this about Turkey? Before I could respond, Dr. Kovac continued, clearly having made a decision about how much information to share. If your family has questions about Phoenix Digital Solutions, perhaps I can provide some context. I'm Dr. Alexandra Kovac, Chief Technology Officer of Kovac Industries. We've been working with Natalie's company for the past 18 months on what has become the largest artificial intelligence implementation project in our company's history. The silence that followed this statement was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. My family's faces displayed a range of expressions from confusion to dawning realization that this conversation was already far beyond anything they had anticipated. Victoria found her voice first. "I'm sorry, did you say Kovac Industries, as in Kovac Industries, the international conglomerate?" "That's correct," Dr. Kovac replied, clearly accustomed to people recognizing her company's name. "We operate in 43 countries across manufacturing, energy, telecommunications, and emerging technologies. Our annual revenue last year was approximately $37 billion. Derek sat down heavily in his chair, his real estate deals suddenly seeming much smaller in scope. "And you're working with Phoenix Digital Solutions?" "We are indeed," Dr. Kovac confirmed. "Natalie's artificial intelligence algorithms have revolutionized our supply chain management systems. The efficiency improvements we've seen in just the pilot program have been remarkable." Which brings me to tonight's call. My grandmother was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, calculation, and what might have been the beginning of respect. "Dr. Kovac, forgive me, but could you explain the nature of this business relationship? My granddaughter has been somewhat modest about the scope of her business activities." There was a slight chuckle from the phone. "Modest is one way to put it. Natalie, have you not told your family about the acquisition offer?" The word acquisition hit the table like a physical force. My father gripped his wine glass so tightly I was afraid it might shatter. "Acquisition?" he repeated weakly. "Yes," Dr. Kovac continued, seemingly unaware of the bombshell she was dropping on my family's Thanksgiving dinner. "Kovac Industries has made a formal offer to acquire Phoenix Digital Solutions. The terms we discussed include a base purchase price of $240 million, plus performance bonuses, and a 5-year consulting contract for Natalie personally." The crystal wine glass in my father's hand didn't shatter. It simply slipped from his nerveless fingers and crashed to the floor, sending red wine splashing across the Persian rug that had been in our family for 3 generations. My mother made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. Victoria's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the table. Derek's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. $240 million? My grandmother whispered, her legendary composure finally cracking. "That's the base offer, yes," Dr. Kovac confirmed matter-of-factly. "However, given the accelerated timeline we're now facing, I'm authorized to increase that to $280 million if Natalie can finalize the transition by December 1st. The board meeting in Istanbul tomorrow will determine the final implementation schedule." My Uncle Thomas looked like he was having trouble breathing. "Natalie," he managed to croak, "are you telling us that you've been offered nearly $300 million for your company?" "Actually," Dr. Kovac interjected before I could respond, "that's just from Kovac Industries. I understand there have been other offers as well. Natalie, has Samsung finalized their bid yet? And what about the German consortium?" "Other offers. Samsung, German consortium." Each revelation was like another earthquake, hitting an already devastated landscape. My family's carefully constructed understanding of success, failure, and business reality was being systematically demolished by a woman on speakerphone who was discussing my business ventures with the casual ease of someone ordering coffee. "Dr. Kovac," my grandmother said, her voice barely steady, "could you help us understand the scope of Phoenix Digital Solutions? We seem to have incomplete information about my granddaughter's business activities." "Of course," Dr. Kovac replied, clearly warming to the subject. "Phoenix Digital Solutions has developed the most advanced supply chain optimization algorithms we've ever encountered. Their AI systems can predict and prevent bottlenecks, optimize inventory levels, and reduce operational costs by an average of 37% across multiple industries." She paused, clearly accessing information from her computer. "Currently, Phoenix Digital Solutions is processing data for 43 major corporations across 6 countries. The efficiency improvements they've generated have saved their clients approximately $1.2 billion in operational costs over the past year alone. My Aunt Patricia was gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles had gone white. $1.2 billion in savings? She repeated faintly. That's correct, which is why the bidding war for Phoenix Digital Solutions has become so intense. Beyond Kovac Industries, I know that Samsung has submitted an offer, and there's significant interest from companies in Germany, Japan, and the United States. The technology Natalie has developed represents a fundamental advancement in artificial intelligence applications. Derek was shaking his head slowly as if trying to clear it. Natalie, when you said we might not understand how to define success, I meant, I said quietly, that perhaps $300 million acquisition offers represent a different category of success than the ones we usually discuss at family dinners. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of my mother quietly crying. Whether from relief, shock, pride, or confusion, I couldn't tell. Probably all of them at once. Dr. Kovac, my father said, his voice hoarse, I think we need to apologize to our daughter. We seem to have dramatically misunderstood her business situation. No apology necessary, Dr. Kovac replied diplomatically. Artificial intelligence is a complex field, and the business applications aren't always immediately apparent to those outside the industry. What matters is that Natalie has built something truly revolutionary. She paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. Speaking of which, Natalie, I do need your decision tonight. The Istanbul meeting is at 9 a.m. local time tomorrow, and the logistics team needs to know whether to proceed with the integration timeline we discussed. I looked around the table at my family's stunned faces, realizing that the conversation I'd been dreading for 3 years had just taken a turn that none of us had anticipated. Actually, Dr. Kovac, I said slowly, I think there might be one more person you should meet before we finalize anything. Someone who might have some additional perspectives on this decision. Oh? She asked, clearly intrigued. Another family member? Or perhaps a business advisor? I smiled, checking my phone one more time. Actually, both. She should be arriving any minute now. The cryptic mention of someone arriving sent a new wave of tension through our already shell-shocked dining room. My family was still processing the revelation that their failed daughter was sitting on acquisition offers worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and now I was hinting at yet another layer to this increasingly surreal evening. Someone else is coming? My mother asked, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. Natalie, how many surprises can one Thanksgiving dinner possibly contain? Dr. Kovac's voice came through the speaker with obvious curiosity. Natalie, you mentioned this person has perspectives on our acquisition discussions. Should I be concerned about additional stakeholders I'm not aware of? Not concerned, I said carefully, but perhaps informed. The decision about Kovac Industries' offer isn't entirely mine to make alone. My grandmother's business instincts immediately sharpened. What do you mean it's not entirely yours to make? Phoenix Digital Solutions is your company, isn't it? Derek leaned forward, his real estate background clearly kicking in. Wait, are there partners involved? Silent investors? Because if there are other stakeholders with decision-making authority, that changes the entire dynamic of these acquisition talks. Victoria had recovered her phone and was already pulling up corporate databases. Natalie, I need to ask this directly. What percentage of Phoenix Digital Solutions do you actually own? The question hung in the air with uncomfortable weight. After 3 years of assuming I was struggling alone with a failing startup, my family was suddenly confronting the possibility that Phoenix Digital Solutions might be far more complex than they'd imagined. It's complicated, I said, which immediately triggered alarm bells around the table. Complicated how? My father demanded, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used during hostile board meetings. Natalie, if you have business partners, if there are other stakeholders involved in these decisions, we need to understand the full structure of your business arrangements. Dr. Kovac's voice carried a note of professional concern. Natalie, I was under the impression that you were the sole decision-maker for Phoenix Digital Solutions. If there are partnership agreements or investor relationships that affect our negotiations, Kovac Industries needs to be fully informed. There are no investor relationships, I clarified quickly. Phoenix Digital Solutions doesn't have outside investors in the traditional sense. Then what sense? My Uncle Thomas asked sharply. Because if you're talking about decision-making authority that isn't entirely yours, someone else has a stake in this company. My Aunt Patricia looked genuinely worried. Natalie, please tell me you haven't gotten involved with some kind of questionable business arrangement. Sometimes these technology companies attract unsavory elements. Nothing unsavory, I assured her, but there is a partnership structure that might be unexpected. Victoria set down her phone with exaggerated patience. Natalie Elizabeth Hartwell, I am a senior vice president at Goldman Sachs. I understand complex business structures. Whatever partnership arrangement you've created, I guarantee you I've seen more complicated configurations. Just explain it. I took a deep breath, knowing that this explanation would raise as many questions as it answered. Phoenix Digital Solutions is a joint venture. I own 60%, and my business partner owns 40%. Okay, Derek said slowly, that's actually pretty straightforward. You maintain controlling interest while your partner contributes. What? Capital? Technical expertise? Market access? All of the above, I replied. But the partnership is structured so that major decisions, like acquisition offers, require unanimous agreement between both partners. My grandmother nodded approvingly. That's actually quite smart from a business perspective. It prevents either partner from making impulsive decisions that could damage the company's value. Who is your partner, and what expertise do they bring to the venture? Dr. Kovac's voice carried professional interest. Yes, I'd be curious to meet this partner as well. If they have technical expertise that complements yours, it might influence our integration strategies. My partner, I said carefully, brings a unique combination of capital, industry connections, and strategic vision to Phoenix Digital Solutions. She's actually the reason we were able to scale so quickly and attract the attention of companies like Kovac Industries. She? My mother asked. Your business partner is a woman? Yes, I confirmed, and she should be arriving shortly. In fact, I paused as I heard the distinctive sound of our front gate opening, followed by the low hum of an expensive car engine coming up our circular driveway. That should be her now. Derek immediately stood up and moved toward the window. What kind of car is that? It sounds like something exotic. Probably a Tesla, Victoria suggested. Technology entrepreneurs love their electric vehicles. But Derek was shaking his head as he peered through the curtains. That's not a Tesla. Holy shit, that's a Bugatti. Language, my grandmother said automatically, but her rebuke lacked conviction. Her business mind was clearly processing the implications of a business partner who drove a car worth more than most people's houses. A Bugatti? My Uncle Thomas repeated incredulously. Those things cost over $3 million. What kind of technology entrepreneur drives a $3 million car? Dr. Kovac's voice carried new interest. Natalie, perhaps you could introduce me to your partner during this call. I'd be very interested to understand their perspective on our acquisition offer. Of course, I said, feeling a smile tugging at my lips as I heard the car doors closing outside. I think you'll find her perspective quite illuminating. My father had joined Derek at the window, both of them staring out at whatever automotive marvel had just arrived at our estate. Natalie, my father said slowly, exactly who is your business partner? Before I could answer, our doorbell rang, not the simple chime we usually heard, but the elaborate sequence that indicated someone had used the main entrance reserved for important guests. The same entrance that governors and business leaders used when they visited my grandmother. I'll get it, I said, standing up from the table. Oh, no, you don't, my grandmother said firmly. We're all going to meet this mysterious partner of yours. If she's important enough to drive a Bugatti and influential enough to affect quarter-billion-dollar business decisions, she's important enough for a proper family introduction. The entire family stood up in unison, clearly unified in their determination to finally meet the person who had apparently been instrumental in my impossible success. Dr. Kovacs' voice followed us as we moved toward the foyer. "Natalie, should I remain on the line for introductions?" "Please do," I said, carrying my phone with me. "I think you'll want to hear this conversation." As we reached our grand foyer with its marble floors and crystal chandelier, I could see a silhouette through the frosted glass panels of our front door. Even in shadow, the figure commanded attention. Tall, confident, clearly accustomed to making impressive entrances. My mother smoothed her dress nervously. "Natalie, perhaps you should have warned us that we'd be meeting someone significant tonight. I would have prepared differently." "Some meetings," I said, reaching for the door handle, "are worth the surprise." I opened the door, and the cold November air swept into our foyer along with a woman who immediately transformed the energy of our entire house. She was tall, elegant, probably in her early 50s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a sophisticated chignon. Her coat was clearly custom-tailored, and she moved with the kind of confident grace that suggested she was accustomed to walking into rooms full of important people. But it was her eyes that caught my attention. Intelligent, calculating, and absolutely fearless. These were the eyes of someone who had built something significant and had no intention of apologizing for her success. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that suggested international education and experience. "I hope I'm not interrupting your family dinner too severely." My grandmother stepped forward, her business instincts automatically engaging with someone who clearly operated at her level. "Not at all. We were just having a very enlightening conversation about my granddaughter's business ventures." The woman smiled, and there was genuine warmth in the expression. "Ah, so Natalie has finally decided to share some details about Phoenix Digital Solutions?" "I've been telling her for months that her family deserved to know what she's accomplished." "And you are?" my father asked, extending his hand in greeting. The woman accepted his handshake with firm confidence. "I'm Natalie's business partner and, if I'm being honest, one of her biggest admirers. She's built something truly remarkable." Derek stepped forward, clearly unable to contain his curiosity any longer. "Ma'am, I have to ask, is that your Bugatti in our driveway?" She glanced back toward her car with casual indifference. "One of them, yes. I hope it's not blocking anything important." One of them. The phrase hung in the air like a revelation. Who had multiple Bugattis as casual transportation options? Victoria, her banker's instincts fully engaged, stepped forward with the kind of professional directness that had made her successful on Wall Street. "I'm Victoria Hartwell, Natalie's sister. I work in investment banking, and I have to say I'm very curious about your background and how you came to partner with Natalie." The woman's smile broadened, and I caught a glimpse of something that might have been amusement. "Your sister is quite remarkable, Victoria. She's probably too modest to have mentioned this, but Phoenix Digital Solutions has revolutionized artificial intelligence applications in ways that most people thought were impossible." Dr. Kovacs' voice suddenly came through my phone speaker, clear and excited. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. Could you please identify yourself? Your voice sounds remarkably familiar." The woman glanced at my phone with raised eyebrows. "Dr. Kovac? Alexandra Kovac from Kovac Industries?" "Yes!" Dr. Kovac's excitement was evident, even through the phone speaker. "I knew I recognized your voice. Everyone you're speaking with." "Perhaps," the woman interrupted gently, "I should introduce myself properly." She turned back to my family, her expression shifting into something more formal, more businesslike. "My name is Elena Vasquez." The name hung in the air for a moment before my grandmother's eyes widened in recognition. "Elena Vasquez? As in Vasquez International? The Elena Vasquez?" "The same," Elena confirmed with a slight nod. And that's when my family realized that their Thanksgiving dinner had just become something far more extraordinary than any of them could have possibly imagined. The recognition in my grandmother's voice was like watching a master chess player realize they were facing a grandmaster. Eleanor Hartwell, who had built and maintained a textile empire for 4 decades, who had negotiated with governors and senators, who had never shown deference to anyone in my lifetime, was staring at Elena Vasquez with something approaching awe. Vasquez International, my grandmother repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, the conglomerate that owns everything. Elena smiled with the gracious modesty of someone accustomed to being recognized, but too polite to take satisfaction in the shock she regularly caused. We prefer to think of ourselves as a diversified investment firm with strategic interests in emerging technologies. Dr. Kovac's voice exploded through the phone speaker with professional excitement. Elena Vasquez, I can't believe Natalie didn't mention she was partnered with you. Ms. Vasquez, Kovac Industries has been trying to schedule a meeting with your acquisitions team for over 2 years. Have you now? Elena replied with amused interest. Well, Dr. Kovac, it seems we're already having that meeting, aren't we? My father looked like he was having trouble processing what was happening in his own foyer. I'm sorry, could someone explain exactly who Elena Vasquez is? Because clearly I'm missing something significant. Victoria had her phone out and was frantically typing, her banker's instincts demanding immediate information. Oh my God, she breathed, staring at her screen. Elena Vasquez, age 53, chairman and CEO of Vasquez International, estimated net worth $47 billion. The number hit the room like a physical force. Derek actually stumbled backward and had to steady himself against the marble pillar in our foyer. My Uncle Thomas made a choking sound. My Aunt Patricia gripped my mother's arm for support. 47 billion? My mother whispered, looking between Elena and me with an expression of complete bewilderment. Elena waved dismissively. Forbes estimates are notoriously unreliable. The actual number fluctuates significantly based on market conditions and currency valuations. She said it with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, apparently unaware that her dismissal of a $47 billion estimate as unreliable had just rendered my family speechless. Victoria continued reading from her phone, her voice growing stronger as her professional training kicked in. Vasquez International owns stakes in over 300 companies across 6 continents. Primary holdings include renewable energy, biotechnology, artificial intelligence research, space technology, and, oh my God, she owns 15% of Tesla, 12% of SpaceX, and major stakes in Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. Those are just the public holdings, Elena said mildly. The private investments are where things get interesting. Derek found his voice, though it sounded strained. Ms. Vasquez, when you say you're Natalie's business partner, what exactly does that mean? Elena turned to me with a questioning look. Natalie, how much have you told your family about our working relationship? Not much, I admitted. I was waiting for the right moment to explain the full scope of what we've built together. The full scope? My grandmother asked sharply, her business instincts clearly alarmed by the implication that there was more to discover. Elena nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps we should step inside and continue this conversation properly. I have a feeling there are several important details that need clarification. As we moved back toward the dining room, Elena's presence seemed to transform our family home. The same foyer where I'd been lectured countless times about responsibility and realistic expectations now felt like the setting for international diplomacy. Elena moved through our house with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to palaces and boardrooms. Dr. Kovac, Elena said as we settled back around the dining table, are you still there? Very much so, Dr. Kovac replied, her voice tight with professional excitement. Ms. Vasquez, I have to ask, if you're involved with Phoenix Digital Solutions, Does this change the nature of our acquisition discussions? It might, Elena said, accepting the chair my father hurriedly offered her. But first, I think Natalie's family deserves to understand what their daughter has actually accomplished. She turned to address the table directly, her manner shifting into something more formal and businesslike. 3 years ago, I was looking for artificial intelligence researchers who could solve a specific problem that had been plaguing multiple industries. Traditional supply chain management systems were inefficient, predictable, and vulnerable to disruption. Derek leaned forward, clearly trying to follow the technical explanation. And you found Natalie? Actually, Elena smiled, Natalie found me. She attended a conference I was keynoting in Silicon Valley and approached me afterward with a prototype algorithm that was unlike anything I'd seen before. Most AI researchers focus on optimization within existing parameters. Natalie had created something that could redesign the parameters themselves. Victoria was taking notes on her phone, her banker's training kicking in. So you invested in her company? Not exactly, Elena said. I proposed a partnership. Natalie had the technical breakthrough, but scaling artificial intelligence solutions requires infrastructure, political connections, and market access that most startups simply can't achieve. My grandmother leaned forward with sharp interest. What kind of infrastructure? Quantum computing facilities, international data centers, relationships with regulatory agencies in 43 countries, and access to testing environments that most technology companies spend decades trying to develop, Elena explained. Vasquez International had all of those resources, but we needed Natalie's algorithms to make them useful. Dr. Kovac's voice carried new understanding. So Phoenix Digital Solutions isn't just Natalie's company. It's a partnership between Natalie's technology and Vasquez International's resources? Precisely, Elena confirmed, and the results have exceeded our most optimistic projections. My Uncle Thomas was shaking his head slowly. Natalie, are you telling us that for the past 3 years, while we thought you were struggling in a shared office space, you've actually been working with one of the wealthiest people on the planet? The shared office space was real, I said, but it was never the full picture. Elena's resources allowed us to operate on a scale that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. Elena pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be business reports. Perhaps some concrete examples would be helpful. Dr. Kovac, your company has been testing our systems for 18 months. What efficiency improvements have you documented? Remarkable improvements, Dr. Kovac replied immediately. 37% reduction in operational costs, 42% improvement in delivery times, and virtually eliminated supply chain bottlenecks. The ROI has been extraordinary. And Kovac Industries isn't our largest client, Elena added casually. Natalie, should we tell them about the automotive contracts? I glanced around the table at my family's increasingly stunned faces. Elena, maybe we should take this gradually. Automotive contracts? Derek asked weakly. Elena's smile had a slightly predatory edge. Phoenix Digital Solutions currently processes supply chain data for 7 major automotive manufacturers, including the 3 largest electric vehicle companies in the world. The efficiency improvements we've generated have revolutionized their production capabilities. She paused to check something on her phone. Last month alone, our algorithms saved those 7 companies a combined $430 million in operational costs. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of my Aunt Patricia's wine glass hitting the table harder than intended. $430 million. In 1 month. From just 7 clients. Victoria was staring at her phone screen, with the expression of someone whose professional understanding of wealth and business success was being fundamentally recalibrated. Elena, if I may ask, what percentage of those savings does Phoenix Digital Solutions capture as revenue? Typically 15%, Elena replied matter-of-factly. Though some contracts include performance bonuses that can increase that significantly. My mother was doing math in her head, and I watched her face go pale as she calculated 15% of $430 million. That's over $60 million. In 1 month? A good month, Elena acknowledged, though last month was actually below average. December is typically our strongest month due to holiday season logistics optimization. Dr. Kovac's voice carried professional awe. Ms. Vasquez, I'm beginning to understand why Kovac Industries' acquisition offer might not be as attractive as we initially thought. Oh, it's quite attractive, Elena assured her, but it's also not the only offer on the table. Natalie, have you told them about Samsung's proposal? Or the consortium offer from Germany? Derek looked like he was having trouble breathing. How many offers are there? Elena and I exchanged glances, and I could see the amusement in her eyes. Currently, 17 firm offers, with 3 more expected by the end of the week. 17? My grandmother whispered. The highest being $3.8 billion from a Japanese technology consortium, Elena added casually. And that's when my Uncle Thomas actually fainted. The commotion that followed my Uncle Thomas hitting the floor was surreal. Derek and my father rushed to help him while my mother frantically searched for smelling salts. Elena watched the chaos with the calm observation of someone who had apparently seen people faint at business discussions before, though she did have the grace to look mildly concerned. Perhaps, Elena suggested as Thomas was helped back into his chair, looking dazed and pale, we should take a moment to let everyone process what we've discussed so far. Process? My grandmother said, her voice carrying a strange combination of awe and indignation. Elena, my granddaughter has been sitting at family dinners for 3 years listening to us worry about her future while secretly building a multi-billion-dollar empire. I'm not sure processing adequately covers what's happening here. Dr. Kovac's voice came through the phone speaker with professional excitement barely contained. Ms. Vasquez, I have to ask directly, what are Phoenix Digital Solutions' current annual revenues? Because if the numbers you've mentioned are representative— They are, Elena confirmed. Natalie, I think your family deserves complete transparency at this point. Should we show them the quarterly reports? I looked around the table at my family's expectant faces. My Uncle Thomas was still gripping his chair like it was the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. My parents looked like they were watching a movie about someone else's life. Victoria had given up taking notes and was just staring at Elena with the expression of someone whose professional worldview was being systematically demolished. The quarterly reports might be overwhelming, I said carefully. Elena smiled. Sometimes overwhelming is exactly what's needed for clarity. She pulled out what appeared to be a tablet computer, though it was sleeker and more advanced than any consumer device I'd ever seen. Dr. Kovac, I'm going to send you Phoenix Digital Solutions' third-quarter financial summary. Please feel free to share the relevant highlights with everyone. Sending it now, she said, tapping the screen with practiced efficiency. There was a pause as Dr. Kovac presumably received and opened the document. Then there was a longer pause. Then there was what sounded like papers hitting the floor. Dr. Kovac? Elena asked mildly. Are you there? Yes, I'm here, Dr. Kovac replied, her voice sounding strangled. I'm looking at— Elena, these numbers can't be correct. Which numbers specifically? Elena asked with the patience of someone who had clearly had this conversation before. All of them, Dr. Kovac said weakly. But specifically, the third-quarter revenue figure. It shows $2.4 billion. In 3 months. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the antique clock ticking in the hallway 3 rooms away. $2.4 billion. In 1 quarter. My family's textile business, which they were so proud of, generated about $40 million annually. Derek was the first to find his voice. Did she just say $2.4 billion? With a B? That's correct, Elena said matter-of-factly. Though I should mention that Q3 was actually a slower quarter for us. Q2 was $3.1 billion. My mother made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Natalie, are you telling us that your company generates more money in 1 month than most Fortune 500 companies make in a year? Several times more, Elena corrected gently, though to be fair, our client base includes some of the largest corporations in the world. When you're optimizing supply chains for companies that have annual revenues in the hundreds of billions, even small percentage improvements translate to enormous savings. Victoria had recovered enough to ask professional questions. What are the profit margins on those revenues? Elena glanced at her tablet. Phoenix Digital Solutions operates with approximately 78% profit margins. Derek started to say something, stopped, started again, then just shook his head in defeat. 78% profit margins on billions in revenue. Artificial intelligence scales beautifully, Elena explained. Once the algorithms are developed and tested, the marginal cost of applying them to additional clients is minimal. Most of our expenses are related to quantum computing infrastructure and regulatory compliance across multiple international jurisdictions. Dr. Kovac found her voice again, though it sounded dazed. Ms. Vasquez, looking at these financials, I'm beginning to understand why our acquisition offer might seem modest. Not modest, Elena said diplomatically, but perhaps not reflective of current market valuations. Dr. Kovac, what would Kovac Industries be willing to pay for a company that generates $3 billion in annual profit? The question hung in the air like a mathematical challenge. Everyone at the table was doing mental calculations, and the results were clearly staggering. Based on standard industry multiples, Dr. Kovac said slowly, a technology company with those profit levels and growth trajectory would be valued at anywhere from $60 to $100 billion. My Aunt Patricia made a whimpering sound. $100 billion. The number was so large it seemed abstract, like discussing the distance to galaxies. Which brings us to tonight's real question, Elena said, her tone becoming more serious. Natalie, I need to discuss something with you that your family should probably hear directly. I felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with nervousness. Elena's tone suggested this was the conversation she'd really come here to have, and everything else had been preliminary. What question? I asked. Elena leaned forward, her expression becoming intensely focused. This afternoon, I received a call from the consortium of technology companies we've been negotiating with. They've made a final offer for Phoenix Digital Solutions. How final? Dr. Kovac asked from the phone. Final as in, this is their last and highest bid and they need an answer by tomorrow morning, Elena replied. The offer is for complete acquisition of Phoenix Digital Solutions, including all intellectual property, client contracts, and future development rights. My grandmother's business instincts were clearly screaming warnings. Elena, what's the offer? Elena looked directly at me, her expression serious. $68 billion. Cash. The crystal chandelier above our dining table seemed to dim for a moment, as if the house itself was struggling to process what had just been said. $68 billion. Cash. My father was gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles had gone white. $68 billion? Your 60% ownership would be worth approximately $41 billion, Elena said to me. My 40% would be worth $27 billion. The transaction would close within 60 days. Derek was shaking his head slowly, like someone trying to wake up from a dream. Natalie, are you telling us that you could wake up in 2 months as one of the richest people on the planet? Not one of the richest, Elena corrected with a slight smile. Depending on stock market fluctuations, $41 billion would put her in the top 10 wealthiest individuals globally, probably number 8 or 9. Victoria was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, admiration, and something that might have been fear. Natalie, this is beyond anything I could have imagined. You're not just successful, you're not just wealthy, you're talking about generational wealth that could reshape entire industries. Which is exactly why, Elena said, her tone becoming more serious, this decision is so complex. Natalie, if we accept this offer, Phoenix Digital Solutions disappears. The technology gets absorbed into existing corporate structures, and while we become extraordinarily wealthy, the innovative potential of what we've built gets constrained by traditional corporate thinking. Dr. Kovac's voice carried new urgency. What's the alternative? Elena smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. The alternative is that we don't sell. We use our current revenue streams to fund expansion into quantum computing, space technology, and biotechnology. We become not just wealthy, but influential enough to shape the future of human technological development. She paused, letting the implications sink in. In 5 years, instead of being worth $68 billion, Phoenix Digital Solutions could be worth $200 billion. And instead of being absorbed by existing technology giants, we could be competing directly with them for control of the next phase of human innovation. My mother was looking between Elena and me with the expression of someone watching a conversation that was happening in a different universe from the one she inhabited. Natalie, sweetheart, I don't think I understand what you're being asked to choose between. Elena turned to address my mother directly, her tone becoming gentler. Mrs. Hartwell, your daughter is being asked to choose between becoming one of the wealthiest people alive immediately or potentially becoming one of the most powerful people alive eventually. And I have until tomorrow morning to decide, I added. The weight of that timeline seemed to settle over the table like a physical presence. Tomorrow morning. Less than 12 hours to make a decision that would fundamentally alter not just my life, but potentially the trajectory of human technological development. My grandmother leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting into the calculating mode that had made her legendary in business negotiations. Elena, may I ask what you recommend? Elena's smile broadened, and I caught a glimpse of the strategic thinking that had built her empire. Eleanor, I recommend that Natalie choose the path that terrifies her most. In my experience, the decisions that scare us the most are usually the ones with the greatest potential for extraordinary outcomes. And as I looked around the table at my family's stunned faces, I realized that I wasn't just choosing between offers anymore. I was choosing what kind of person I wanted to become. The question of who I wanted to become hung in the air like a challenge that demanded more than a simple answer. Elena's strategic wisdom about choosing the path that terrified me most was resonating, but I could see that my family was still struggling to process the magnitude of what they'd just learned. My grandmother, ever the astute businesswoman, was the first to ask the practical questions that would help her understand the full scope of the decision I was facing. Elena, before Natalie makes this choice, I think we need to understand exactly what we're discussing. What would rejecting $68 billion actually mean in practical terms? Elena nodded approvingly. Excellent question, Eleanor. Let me walk you through both scenarios completely. She turned her tablet so everyone could see the screen and began pulling up what appeared to be detailed business projections and strategic plans. If we accept the acquisition offer, the process is straightforward. Phoenix Digital Solutions gets absorbed into the consortium, which includes 3 of the largest technology companies in the world. Natalie and I receive our payments, sign non-compete agreements for 5 years, and essentially retire from active involvement in artificial intelligence development. Derek leaned forward, his real estate background making him focus on the financial certainties. But you'd both be extraordinarily wealthy. Natalie could buy anything she wanted, invest in any venture, support any cause. $41 billion is generational wealth that could last centuries. True, Elena agreed, but there are limitations that come with that wealth. The non-compete agreements would prevent us from developing competing AI technologies. The intellectual property we've created would be controlled by corporations with existing business models and conservative approaches to innovation. Victoria was taking notes again, her banker's training helping her analyze the strategic implications. What about the alternative scenario? What does expansion actually look like? Elena's expression shifted into something more intense, more visionary. If we reject the acquisition, We use our current revenue streams to fund aggressive expansion into 3 specific areas that represent the future of human technological development. She began scrolling through detailed technical diagrams and financial projections. First, quantum computing infrastructure. Current quantum computers are experimental and limited. Our AI algorithms, combined with quantum processing power, could solve computational problems that are currently impossible. Climate modeling, drug discovery, space exploration logistics. We're talking about technologies that could fundamentally change how human civilization operates. My father was struggling to follow the technical aspects but clearly understood the ambition involved. Elena, you're talking about competing directly with Google, IBM, Microsoft, companies with unlimited resources and decades of experience. Companies with unlimited resources and legacy thinking, Elena corrected. That's exactly why there's an opportunity. Those corporations are constrained by existing business models, shareholder expectations, and bureaucratic structures that prevent truly revolutionary innovation. Dr. Kovac's voice came through the phone with professional excitement. Ms. Vasquez, are you suggesting that Phoenix Digital Solutions could become a direct competitor to the major technology conglomerates? Not just a competitor, Elena said, her tone carrying absolute conviction. A disruptor. Dr. Kovac, your industry knowledge. What happens when a small, agile company with breakthrough technology challenges established market leaders? Sometimes, Dr. Kovac replied slowly, the small company gets crushed. But sometimes, if the technology is revolutionary enough, the small company becomes the new market leader. Elena smiled. Exactly. And that brings us to the second area of expansion, space technology. Natalie's algorithms for supply chain optimization translate directly to space mission logistics. Satellite deployment, Mars colonization supply chains, asteroid mining operations. We're looking at an industry that's currently worth hundreds of billions, but could be worth trillions within a decade. My Uncle Thomas, who had recovered enough to participate in the conversation, looked genuinely confused. Elena, are you seriously suggesting that Natalie could become involved in space exploration? Thomas, 3 years ago, would you have believed that Natalie could build a company worth $68 billion? Elena asked gently. Sometimes what seems impossible is just what hasn't been tried yet. She turned back to her tablet and pulled up another set of projections. The third area is biotechnology. Artificial intelligence applications in drug discovery, genetic research, and medical diagnostics. Our algorithms could accelerate pharmaceutical development by decades, potentially solving diseases that have plagued humanity for centuries. My mother was looking between Elena and me with an expression of wonder and concern. Sweetheart, Elena is talking about changing the world. That's an enormous responsibility. It is, I agreed. But Mom, that's exactly why the decision is so complex. Do I take the money and let someone else shape the future, or do I accept the responsibility and try to shape it myself? My grandmother leaned forward, her business instincts fully engaged. Elena, what are the realistic timelines and financial requirements for this expansion strategy? Elena pulled up detailed financial models that showed projected investments and returns. Conservative estimates suggest we'd need to invest approximately $15 billion over the next 3 years to establish competitive positions in quantum computing, space technology, and biotechnology. Derek whistled softly. $15 billion. That's a substantial portion of your current company valuation. But based on our current revenue growth, entirely manageable, Elena replied. Phoenix Digital Solutions is currently generating enough profit to fund that expansion while maintaining operational growth in our core AI business. Victoria was analyzing the projections with her banker's expertise. Elena, what are the risk factors? What happens if the expansion doesn't succeed as projected? Elena's expression became more serious. Worst-case scenario, we lose the investments, our company value drops significantly, and we end up with a smaller but still highly profitable AI business. We'd still be wealthy, just not world-changingly wealthy. And best-case scenario? My father asked. Best-case scenario, Elena said, her voice carrying quiet intensity. Phoenix Digital Solutions becomes the most valuable company in human history. We're talking about technologies that could solve climate change, enable interplanetary colonization, and eliminate diseases that currently kill millions of people annually. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Natalie wouldn't just be wealthy, she'd be instrumental in shaping the next phase of human civilization. Dr. Kovac's voice carried new understanding. Ms. Vasquez, you're not just offering Natalie a business decision. You're offering her a choice between personal wealth and historical significance. Precisely, Elena confirmed, and that's why this decision can't be made based on financial calculations alone. It requires Natalie to decide what kind of legacy she wants to leave. My Aunt Patricia, who had been quietly listening to this extraordinary conversation, finally found her voice. Natalie, do you have any idea what you want to do? I looked around the table at my family's expectant faces. 3 hours ago, they'd been conducting an intervention to save me from my apparent failures. Now they were watching me decide between becoming one of the wealthiest people alive or potentially one of the most influential people in human history. I have some thoughts, I said carefully. But Elena, there's one more factor we need to discuss. If we choose expansion, what happens to our current clients? What happens to the relationships we've built with companies like Kovac Industries? Elena smiled, and I could see approval in her expression for asking the right strategic question. That's the beauty of our position, Natalie. Our current clients become our partners in expansion. Kovac Industries, for example, has expertise in international manufacturing that would be invaluable for quantum computing infrastructure development. Dr. Kovac's excitement was evident through the phone. Are you suggesting a partnership rather than an acquisition? I'm suggesting, Elena said, that instead of selling Phoenix Digital Solutions to the existing technology establishment, we build a new technology establishment, with our current clients as founding partners, rather than passive consumers. The magnitude of what Elena was proposing was finally becoming clear. She wasn't just suggesting that I reject a massive acquisition offer. She was suggesting that I help create an entirely new paradigm for how breakthrough technologies get developed and deployed. Elena, my grandmother said slowly, you're proposing that Natalie become a founding member of what could essentially be a new industrial revolution. Eleanor, Elena replied with a slight smile, I'm proposing that Natalie lead it. And as the weight of that possibility settled over our Thanksgiving table, I realized that the choice I was facing wasn't just about business or money or even legacy. It was about whether I was brave enough to try to change the world. The question of whether I was brave enough to change the world hung in the silence that followed Elena's challenge. But as I looked around the table at my family's faces, I realized that this decision wasn't just about courage or ambition, or even historical significance. It was about something much more personal and much more painful. Elena, I said quietly, before I make this decision, there's something I need to address with my family. Something that's been driving this whole situation from the beginning. Elena nodded, her expression shifting to something more gentle and understanding. Of course, Natalie. Take all the time you need. I turned to face my family directly, feeling emotions that I'd been suppressing for 3 years, finally demanding to be acknowledged. The reason I didn't tell you about Phoenix Digital Solutions, about the partnership with Elena, about any of this, it wasn't because I wanted to deceive you or manipulate you or make you worry unnecessarily. My mother reached across the table toward me, her face showing the pain she'd been carrying. Then why, sweetheart? Why did you let us believe you were struggling when you were building something so extraordinary? The question I'd been dreading finally gave me the opportunity to voice the hurt that had been shaping my choices for years. Because every time I tried to share my dreams with this family, I was told they were unrealistic. Every time I mentioned artificial intelligence or technology innovation, I was dismissed as naive. Every time I suggested that the future might look different from the past, I was lectured about tradition and proven business models. Derek started to object, but I held up my hand. Let me finish. Derek, 3 years ago at Christmas, when I tried to explain machine learning algorithms, you literally laughed and said I was playing with toys. Victoria, when I mentioned that I could revolutionize financial services, you told me I didn't understand how real business worked. Victoria's face flushed with the memory. Natalie, we were trying to protect you from disappointment. These technology ventures have such high failure rates. But you never asked if I knew what I was doing, I interrupted, my voice carrying years of accumulated frustration. You never considered that maybe I had researched the market, understood the risks, and developed something genuinely revolutionary. You assumed failure before you even tried to understand what I was building. My father looked genuinely pained. Natalie, we've always supported your education, your ambitions. You supported my ambitions as long as they fit within your understanding of legitimate success, I corrected. When I changed my major from business to computer science, you spent months trying to convince me I was making a mistake. When I turned down the job at Goldman Sachs to start Phoenix Digital Solutions, you staged an intervention. When I tried to explain why artificial intelligence was the future, you told me I was young and naive. My grandmother, who had been listening with the intense focus she usually reserved for complex negotiations, spoke carefully. Natalie, you're right that we didn't understand your field. But we were concerned because we love you and wanted to protect you from what we saw as likely failure. But grandmother, I said, my voice becoming more emotional, your concern felt like judgment. Your protection felt like dismissal. Every family gathering became a trial, where I had to defend my choices to people who had already decided I was wrong. Elena watched this exchange with the quiet attention of someone who understood family dynamics and business psychology. She didn't interrupt, but her presence seemed to lend weight to my words. So when the partnership with Elena started showing real results, I continued, when Phoenix Digital Solutions began generating serious revenue, when major corporations started competing for our technology, I made a choice. I chose to prove my success privately rather than fight for your belief publicly. My Uncle Thomas, still pale from his earlier shock, looked genuinely remorseful. Natalie, if we had known what you were actually accomplishing. But that's the point, Uncle Thomas. You could have known. You could have asked deeper questions, done your own research, tried to understand my field, instead of dismissing it. Instead, you assumed that because you didn't understand artificial intelligence, it must not be legitimate. My Aunt Patricia was crying now, clearly understanding the pain behind my words. Sweetheart, we made assumptions based on our own experiences. In our generation, most technology startups did fail. We thought we were being realistic. And maybe you were being realistic based on your experience, I acknowledged. But you weren't being curious. You weren't being open to the possibility that the world might be changing faster than your experience could predict. Dr. Kovac's voice came through the phone, gentle but insightful. Natalie, it sounds like you've been carrying this hurt for a long time. The secrecy wasn't just about business strategy, it was about emotional protection. Exactly, I said, feeling relief at having this understood. Every month that Phoenix Digital Solutions grew stronger, every major contract we signed, every breakthrough we achieved, I wanted to share it with my family. But I was terrified of having my success dismissed the same way my dreams had been dismissed. My mother was crying now, her earlier shock replaced by maternal pain. Natalie, we failed you. We failed to believe in you when you needed our support most. Mom, I said, reaching across to take her hand, you didn't fail me entirely. You raised me to be independent, to think critically, to work hard for what I believed in. Those qualities are exactly what enabled me to build Phoenix Digital Solutions. Elena spoke for the first time in several minutes, her voice carrying both wisdom and compassion. Natalie, this conversation is exactly why tonight's decision is so important. You're not just choosing between business strategies. You're choosing whether to continue hiding your capabilities or to step fully into your power. My grandmother leaned forward, her expression showing a mixture of pride and regret. Natalie, I've spent 40 years in business, and I've learned that the most successful people are often those who had to prove themselves against skepticism. Your determination to succeed despite our doubts may have been exactly what you needed to achieve something this extraordinary. But it shouldn't have been necessary, my father said, his voice heavy with realization. Our daughter shouldn't have had to hide her success from the people who should have been celebrating it. Derek was shaking his head slowly. Nat, I keep thinking about all those family dinners, all those times we offered you advice about realistic career choices, while you were sitting there knowing you'd already built something we couldn't even comprehend. It wasn't malicious, I said, feeling the need to offer some comfort. You were operating from love and concern, but it was painful to be treated like a confused child when I was actually building something revolutionary. Victoria wiped her eyes and looked at me directly. Natalie, can you forgive us? Can you forgive years of not believing in you, when we should have been your biggest supporters? The question hung in the air with enormous emotional weight. This was the conversation I'd been avoiding for 3 years. The confrontation that had driven me to secrecy and isolation from the people I loved most. I can forgive you, I said finally, but more importantly, I need you to understand something. The decision I'm making tomorrow isn't just about money or business success or even changing the world. It's about choosing whether to continue hiding who I really am or to step forward as the person I've actually become. Elena smiled, and there was deep approval in her expression. Natalie, that's exactly why I recommended choosing the path that terrifies you most. Fear often indicates growth, and growth requires authenticity. My grandmother reached across the table and took my other hand, her grip firm and warm. Natalie, speaking for this entire family, I want you to know that whatever you decide tomorrow, you have our complete support. We may not understand artificial intelligence or quantum computing or space technology, but we understand courage, and we understand excellence. She paused, her voice becoming more emotional. And we understand that we're looking at someone who has achieved something extraordinary despite our doubts, not because of our support. That's a level of strength and determination that deserves our respect, not our intervention. My father stood up and moved around the table to embrace me, something he hadn't done since I was a child. Natalie, I'm proud of you, not just for what you've built, but for who you've become in building it. And tomorrow, when you make this decision, I want you to make it based on your vision of the future, not on our fears from the past. As I sat there, surrounded by my family's finally offered support, I realized that the emotional resolution I'd been seeking for 3 years wasn't just about forgiveness or understanding. It was about finally being seen for who I actually was, rather than who they'd feared I might become. And that recognition gave me exactly the clarity I needed to make tomorrow's decision. 6 months later, I stood in the executive boardroom of the newly constructed Phoenix Digital Solutions headquarters in downtown Riverside, looking out through floor-to-ceiling windows at a city skyline that had been transformed by our presence. The 40-story glass tower that housed our quantum computing research labs gleamed in the morning sunlight, while construction crews worked on the second building that would house our space technology division. The decision I'd made that Thanksgiving night had set in motion changes that none of us could have fully anticipated. I'd chosen the path that terrified me most. Natalie, Elena said, entering the boardroom with her usual confident stride, the Sol team just confirmed successful implementation of the new supply chain algorithms. Samsung's efficiency improvements are exceeding our projections by 18%. She set down a tablet displaying global operations data that showed Phoenix Digital Solutions now active in 67 countries, with quantum computing partnerships established in 12 nations, and 3 active space technology contracts with international space agencies. And Dr. Kovac? I asked, reviewing the morning reports. Kovac Industries has officially signed on as our primary manufacturing partner for the quantum infrastructure expansion, Elena replied with satisfaction. Their facilities in Eastern Europe will be producing our quantum processors by the end of the year. Through the windows, I could see the Hartwell Industries building in the distance, looking smaller somehow than it had 6 months ago. Not because it had shrunk, but because my perspective on what constituted a significant business operation had fundamentally changed. My phone buzzed with a text from my grandmother, board meeting this afternoon to finalize the Hartwell-Phoenix partnership. Still can't believe my granddaughter is now my biggest client. The partnership with my family's textile company had been one of the unexpected developments following that Thanksgiving revelation. Within 2 months of my decision to expand Phoenix Digital Solutions, my grandmother had approached Elena with a proposal to modernize Hartwell Industries' entire operational infrastructure using our AI systems. The results had been remarkable. Hartwell Industries' efficiency had improved by 43%. Their carbon footprint had decreased by 37%, and their annual revenue had increased by 86%. My family's textile business was now more profitable than it had ever been in its century-long history. The biotechnology division update? I asked Elena, settling into my chair at the head of the conference table where we held our weekly strategy meetings. Dr. Morrison's team achieved another breakthrough yesterday, Elena reported, referring to our chief medical officer who led our pharmaceutical research division. The Alzheimer's drug development timeline has been accelerated by approximately 3 years using our predictive modeling algorithms. Clinical trials could begin next year. The weight of that statement wasn't lost on me. 3 years earlier, I'd been sitting in shared office space in Millfield, struggling to prove that artificial intelligence could optimize supply chains. Now our algorithms were accelerating medical breakthroughs that could save millions of lives. Elena pulled up a presentation on the wall-mounted display showing global expansion metrics. Current revenue projections show we'll reach $12 billion this quarter, with profit margins maintaining at 74%. The quantum computing division is ahead of schedule, the space technology contracts are generating international attention, and the biotechnology partnerships are attracting the world's leading medical researchers. I studied the numbers, still sometimes amazed by the scale of what we'd built. Elena, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd taken the $68 billion offer? Elena smiled, settling into her chair across from me. I wonder about it often, actually. You'd be extraordinarily wealthy, certainly. But you'd also be watching other people build the future you could have created. She gestured toward the window, taking in the construction activity and the bustling technology campus that had transformed downtown Riverside. Instead, you're employing 12,000 people directly, with another 40,000 jobs created through our partnerships and supplier relationships. You're not just wealthy, Natalie, you're economically significant. The intercom on my desk chimed softly. Ms. Hartwell, your family has arrived for lunch. Send them up, I replied, feeling the familiar warmth that came with anticipating family time that was no longer fraught with judgment or disappointment. A few minutes later, my family filed into the boardroom, their expressions still carrying traces of the awe they'd shown during their first visit to our headquarters 3 months ago. My parents looked around at the advanced technology displays and global operations monitors with the pride of people whose daughter had built something beyond their imagination. The quantum lab tour was fascinating, my father said, embracing me warmly. Though I understood perhaps 10% of what Dr. Patterson explained about quantum entanglement applications. Derek grinned, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. Nat, I have to tell you, the real estate development around your headquarters has been incredible. Property values in this district have increased by 40% since Phoenix Digital Solutions announced the expansion. Victoria, who had requested a transfer to Goldman Sachs' Technology Investment Division specifically to better understand companies like mine, was reviewing financial reports on her tablet. Natalie, your Q2 projections show potential for $15 billion in revenue. At this growth rate, Phoenix Digital Solutions could become the most valuable company in the world within 5 years. My grandmother entered last, moving with the careful dignity of someone in her 80s but carrying herself with the authority of someone still actively involved in major business decisions. Natalie, dear, I've been reviewing the Hartwell-Phoenix partnership results. Our productivity improvements have been remarkable. But more importantly, we've been able to hire 300 additional workers and expand into sustainable textile production. She paused, her expression becoming more emotional. Your technology hasn't just saved our family business, it's transformed it into something I never imagined possible. We're now the most efficient textile manufacturer in North America, and our environmental impact improvements have earned us recognition from the Environmental Protection Agency. Elena excused herself to handle urgent calls from our Tokyo and Berlin offices, leaving me alone with my family in the boardroom, where I now made decisions that affected millions of people and billions of dollars. Natalie, my mother said, settling into the chair beside me, I need to tell you something that I should have said months ago. I looked at her expectantly, curious about what she felt still needed to be addressed after our emotional conversation that Thanksgiving night. I'm sorry, she said simply, not just for not believing in you, but for not even trying to understand what you were capable of. When I see what you've built, what you're building, the problems you're solving, I realize that our lack of support wasn't just disappointing for you, it was a disservice to the world. My father nodded, his expression serious. Your mother's right. If we had encouraged you instead of doubting you, if we had supported your ambitions instead of trying to redirect them, you might have achieved all of this years earlier. We didn't just underestimate you, we slowed down progress that could have benefited humanity. Derek leaned forward, his tone becoming more thoughtful. You know what's really remarkable, Nat? 6 months ago, we thought success meant making enough money to live comfortably, maybe leave something for our kids. Now we're watching you solve problems that textbooks said were unsolvable. The Alzheimer's research, the climate change modeling, the space exploration logistics, Victoria added. You're not just running a successful business, you're advancing human civilization. My Uncle Thomas, who had recovered from his Thanksgiving fainting spell to become one of Phoenix Digital Solutions' most enthusiastic supporters, smiled broadly. Natalie, when people ask me about my niece, I tell them she's not just successful. She's historically significant. My grandmother reached across the table and took my hand, her grip still firm despite her age. Natalie, I've spent my entire adult life building and running businesses. I thought I understood what success looked like. But what you've accomplished, this transcends success. This is legacy. As I sat there surrounded by my family's support and admiration, looking out at a city that was being transformed by the company I'd built, I realized that the choice I'd made that Thanksgiving night had given me something more valuable than wealth or even historical significance. It had given me the opportunity to become the person I was always meant to be. My phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Kovac. Natalie, the Istanbul facility is operational. We're ready to begin quantum computing tests that could revolutionize global logistics. Thank you for choosing to change the world instead of just joining it. Elena returned to the boardroom, her expression showing the satisfaction that came from successfully coordinating complex international operations. Natalie, the afternoon schedule includes calls with the European Space Agency about Mars mission logistics, a presentation from the medical research team about the cancer treatment algorithms, and a strategy session about expanding into renewable energy optimization. I looked around the table at my family's faces, then out at the city skyline where construction cranes were building the future we'd imagined. In choosing the path that terrified me most, I discovered something remarkable. The future wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you built, one impossible decision at a time. And as I prepared for another day of building tomorrow, I realized that the girl who'd been called a failure at Thanksgiving dinner had become the woman who was helping to write the next chapter of human history. Sometimes the best revenge really was extraordinary success. But even better than revenge was the knowledge that my success was making the world a better place for everyone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.